You know what? You know, my ears suck. Your ears suck. I'm not really. If I'm. Yeah. Yeah. Just.
We're going to try to get started. It is 3:50. If you're here from the last session, please leave. If you're here for NetMod, come on in. Oops. I'll be up on Jabber in a moment. As usual, we are going to try to use Etherpad to do our joint minute taking. The URL to Etherpad is that last one. You can find it off the tools page. And you can go to minutes and click the Etherpad link. All right, let's get started. So we have a new note well. It feels later in the week. It is, what day is it? Just Tuesday? But you should have seen this new note well. It applies to every meeting and discussion that happens in this working group and all the other working groups during the week. I think it's pretty, folks should be pretty familiar with the concepts. Please just make sure you disclose any IPR that you may have related to our discussions. We are doing the usual video and audio. When you go to the mic, it's very important to say your name. That is both for those listening as well as those who watch video or listen to the recording later and help get our minutes correct. If you didn't like that, the previous Etherpad link, this one also works. We'll be jumping on to. We have two sessions. You obviously made it to the first one. Thank you. The second one, there was some discussion about whether we were going to have that at all. At the first agenda that came out said likely to be canceled. We are not canceling it. We're actually going to have hopefully a very good schema mount discussion on the second one. And that will be focused on the version that was just published within the last hour. There's a 09 out there. And more importantly, what we want to do as a working group in the long term, considering that we now have Yang Library BIS through working group last call and a good full NMDA support. So that's going to be all of Wednesday. This session, we're going to start out with a couple of chartered items. Chris and Martin. And then we're going to go into a list of non-chartered items. There's one item here that got just added at the last session. So there was a meet in NetConf. There was a presentation of a draft by Alex, and it really seems more appropriate to hear. At least that's my opinion, and that seemed to be the consensus in the room as well. So we'll hit that one at the end.
And also because it overlaps with the finite state machine draft that's being presented here today.
Alex?
Overlaps? I mean, no. Sorry, it's a different one.
There is another draft there that we had asked that the chairs had asked the authors to come talk to the finite state machine people. That's good too. That one I don't expect to be presented. I don't even see the author in the room actually. Okay. Session 2 we've already talked about. So since the last meeting, we're very excited. We have 4 RFCs. We think that having this nice batch of RFCs is a great way to show our appreciation to our outgoing AD, that we actually did some work under his tenure. And it's already, it's got published today? Oh, yeah, right. So thank you, Benoit, for expediting that processing. And Benoit, thank you for all the support and guidance during your tenure. So of those 2 listed below, one of those got published, and we have another 3 that are submitted to the ISG for publication and are working their way through the process. So Benoit said that he's hoping this week, which is for me amazingly fast, but quite awesome. Post-working group last call, but not yet submitted for publication request. There's the ACL model that's ready for write-up. Basically, there were some comments that needed to be addressed. They were addressed, in the last week? Pretty recently, and we'll get the shepherd will get to the write-up. We have schema mount on the agenda. We already talked about that. And we have a couple of new working group documents, both of which are on the agenda. We do have a couple of documents not on the agenda, and one of them is expired. And we'd like to put the author on the spot and say, what do we need to get to last call?
So apologies, I've just been short of time in NDA stuff. So now that that's out of the way, or majority out of the way, my expectation here is there's not that much more to do in these drafts. It's really just adding some examples through, and then I think that they should be ready for working group last call. So there's not much further to do, I think, on them. Actually, one exception here on the sub-interface VLAN model, that one will need to get checked with IEEE that they're happy with the structure of that final structure.
In order to do that check, do we need to do a formal liaison, or will you just handle it through informal, people working in both organizations?
I would suggest I just post directly to 822.1 and say, look, this is the proposed.
You know what, I'm sorry.
I'll do it formally, I think. I think that's the easiest thing. If it needs to go formally afterwards, then so be it. But I can approach them directly if I have to do that.
Okay, so you'll approach them directly, and if we need a liaison afterwards, you'll do that, right?
Yeah.
Okay. The acoustics are a little weird in here, and it's actually a little hard for us to hear, and it's not a volume issue, it's just the sort of almost half echo that we're getting. So if we ask you to repeat yourself, please just know it's because it's a little hard to hear up here.
Okay.
Thanks. We have a series of liaisons incoming. The first one is coming from ITUT. We think it's really, this one's really notable because we're being invited to participate. So the folks here in NetMod are being invited to participate in monthly conference calls on activities that are going on there. I'm not sure I have seen this come in, that type of offer come in this way before. We certainly have had very good cooperation with ITUT in the past, but usually that's through our liaisons setting things up rather than it just coming in, the people setting things up rather than just coming in through a liaison. So I think this is noteworthy, and we certainly would like to highlight it so that anyone who is interested in this area should feel free to participate. We have the next one's coming in from Broadband Forum. It's an update on OEM-related activities. It's I don't think there's any response necessary. It is also interesting for those of you that care about this topic. I happen to be one of those, but many of you may not. The next one is one we actually discussed at the last IETF, and we had some draft text coming out, but I couldn't see the actual formal response, and I think it went up sort of it left our draft and was headed up through Benoit. I'm not sure what happened there and what the right next step is. That's it.
Benoit speaking. So actually, yes, I've seen those liaisons where a response was required. I wanted to send like an answer to all different SDOs, right, for NMDA. And I was just waiting for the last piece, which was a schema mount, right? So hopefully it will be done pretty soon. And then we've got like the bunch of things we want to say. Okay, we have revised our store, it's published. We have all the Yang modules in IETF that are NMDA compliant. I could go in the Yang catalog and do a query for all the drafts that are NMDA compliant, all the RFCs, and I could provide this. But I was missing the last schema mount piece. So that's the status. I guess that by Wednesday evening, it's not been a problem any longer, but that's the status.
Well, on Wednesday, all right, I'm just going to steal some thunder there. We're going to have to do another last call in the working group. So we won't be able to say it's all completely done on Wednesday. We just know where we're going.
That's fine.
So the note I took down is that the response was gated by schema mount. We need an updated response, and once we're ready, we'll send it. Okay, thank you. And this IEEE thing is very similar, and it makes sense. It's consistent with what Benoit just said. Okay, with that, bring up the next. Chris. Chris.
Hi, so I'm Christian Hops, and I'm presenting on the module tags draft that just I think that's out of date. We just adopted this as a working group item.
Anywhere, it's USB.
No.
No? Try again.
No. The thing right.
All right, just tell me next.
Next slide. So this is so basically it was adopted by the working group. I just republished the same text that was adopted, but we had a bunch of changes that were indicated by the group that we should do. And so I put that revision through also. That's the 01 revision. So one of the changes was to use configuration only. Previously, we had sort of half moved that direction, but we had a reset tag RPC, and this was the idea was that you can delete tags that designers or implementers might have put on a module that a user didn't agree with. That functionality is still there, but we have a different way of masking those tags. So we do that through configuration now. I also removed the revision from the list keys. Maybe a little discussion on the list on this. I don't know, is it possible to optional keys? I don't think so, right? So yeah, that's where that comes into play. And we also removed the Yang library augment.
See next.
I didn't.
Oh, sorry.
You just weren't listening. So this is the old module. You can see we had a list of tags, a list of modules followed by a list of tags for each module, and then this reset tags RPC. Next slide, please. The new one is simpler. We have a list of modules indicated by name. For each module, we have a list of tags, and then we also have a list of mask tags. So this effectively is a no, right? So if somebody put on like, this module supports super duper feature A, and the user says, no, it's full of bugs. It doesn't support super duper feature A, so I'm going to mask that tag. Right? So that's what that is for. Next slide, please. So I thought I'd put a list up here. One of the questions that came up on the list during the adoption call was, what is this for? I mean, I think to me it's kind of self-obvious, but that doesn't mean it's self-obvious to everybody else. One of the reasons that we came up with the idea was surrounding the device model that we were doing with the routing Yang design team. And that was basically a model that was trying to organize all the modules under this tree. So you had like a tree with the root of routing, and then under routing you had control plane, and then you had OSPF and ISIS and BGP, right? So nobody liked that, and everybody wanted the more flat model, the flat design that NetMod affords, with less coupling, right? But people do like to organize things. That's why it made sense to some people, right? So we bring tags in, and now we can say, well, these are routing things. They're protocols. And then you can see the difference in coloring if you're not colorblind. The bottom tag is IGP, for ISIS. For BGP, it's protocol routing and EGP. And then the third one is NetConf, which is a protocol but not routing, and it's system management, right? So it's a way to organize and categorize things. Next slide.
You have it right hand.
All right. How did you test it? So the open issues, we do have a list of tags, which are basically surrounded, we came up with that list based on the device model idea. There might be it would be good if we could go over those as a group. I know Martin had some ideas about how he wanted to use this. It's not just the device model, like you could say these are open config, models or modules, right? Or not, they conform to the open config scheme, or whatever. We could use more examples, perhaps, that people thought that we needed. And again, people said clarify the problem. I kind of was like, well, humans like to categorize groups of stuff, right? I came up with another example that's not module related, but an analogy would be a breakfast menu, right? I mean, you have a bunch of recipes that you're looking at, and we like to organize them into, or a menu, right? Breakfast and lunch and dinner, and then maybe land and sea. I don't know. I'm just trying to come up with examples of grouping things by tags. So yeah, I think that's it. That we don't have a lot to do here. I think it's going to be pretty quick.
Rob Wilson, Cisco, could you go back to the slide of the new YAM model? So we had some discussion about this new structure. I thought it might just be worth bringing up here. One of the implications is that mask tags is going to be a list of things you're removing from the operational state. So in the operational view of the data, you would only see the tags list, module tags tag. You wouldn't see the mask tags. You only see the tags that are in effect. So this is an interesting case where you've got something you're configuring that then effectively doesn't appear in operational state. It doesn't appear in the applied config because it's effectively like a negative config item. So I think it would be good just to think that through and check that that's the right solution. I think it probably is, but just to raise it.
Yeah, I think when I talked to Robert earlier, we're kind of paving new ground here, right? I mean, Cisco is sort of famous for the no concept, like no interface and no shutdown, right? But we don't really have a way to do that, through positive config, and this is the way I did it. But yeah, we should look at it, make sure it's the right way.
Benoit Claes. So, Chris, how are you going to use this yourself? And will you have your tool chain depending on that?
I personally don't do our module organization, so I can't say exactly how they're going to use it, but presumably the device model way first.
Right, but there are three ways. There is IANA, there is vendor, and there is local, I think.
Yeah, I would be the local person in this chain, if you're asking me personally, or my company.
What would you expect the vendor to put in there?
So the vendor is, I don't have expectations for anything. It's like hashtags, right? I picture it more as something it's an obvious thing that we do. We organize things, and people may come up with new ways to use it. The example that I came up with first, or that caused it to be birthed, was that the device model. That would mostly be a design time thing, right? Because you would say, I'm writing a routing protocol, OSPF, right? So I'm going to tag it with protocol routing IGP. So that's a design time. Now the vendor, I'm not sure how the vendor tagging would happen. Maybe they could be tagged with OpenConfig if it was outside of the thing. No, not really. And then the user could be tagging it in however they wanted to organize their modules. The vendor one is, I think, probably the least one that would be used. But yeah. All right. But we just left it open for why close down.
I'm not against this, right? I'm trying to find a killer app for this, right? Because, if this is design time, as opposed to, it could be changed along the lifetime, then, the tags have to be perfect, right? And we've been trying those type of tags in the past, so discussing, in the context, for example, of energy management. Oh, but I want to know if this is like a clock or something that will wake me up in the morning. And then whenever you combine the two, then it's a new tag. So, but okay, I will be thinking about it.
No, I mean, so I tend to not bring up the really cool example that I think would be really cool, right? Which would be to tag APIs, right? Like if you have a common path that gives you common functionality in a module, you could tag it as supporting that. It's not a feature. It is a feature, right? But it would be cross-module. And you could say that it supports that path to that function. And then you could tag any module that supported that. But this is kind of, I think, outside of the standards purview. I don't think it's as useful in IETF as it would be in maybe models that you designed, for your own use.
So Martin Björklund, so maybe I can shortly explain the problem that I have that I want to solve with this. And that is when we talk to a device from an orchestrator and the device advertises a huge set of modules, and there are some overlap between these models. For example, there might be a native way of doing stuff, IETF standard way of doing stuff, an open config way of doing stuff. And these models overlap, or they provide the same functionality, but through different modules. So in that case, it would be very useful to find out which modules belong to which set, so that we can maybe pick one of them instead of having all three of them. So that's something that I would like to see. I would even like to see that as standard tags from the beginning, not as a vendor-specific thing.
Right.
There was another comment on list about these tags. So now you have this IANA registry. Did you consider using identities or something instead?
No, because I mean, the idea was to make it so it could be used organically, right? Like, so that there was the user could add them easily to the system.
Right.
And so that would be done sort of I install routers or hardware in my system and I want to add things. I don't want to have to go and change modules.
Michael from Huawei, and read this document. I think it is useful work, and I just some curiosity. Do you want to define some metadata also similar to this type, so that you can, if you run in the get config or another operation, so you can redrive this module and both this tab? Because I think there's only configuration data tree, and if you drive this module, you run in the get config to redrive this module, it cannot receive this tags information. Do you think it need to define some metadata similar to
So
tags?
I'm sorry, it is hard to understand when it's echoing. I think what you're asking is, well, I caught metadata, right? And I would, as Lou likes to point out, this is metadata. Right? I mean, it's sort of data that we're attaching to modules. Can you give a shorter example of what beyond metadata you mean?
Okay, it's like if you your slide the XML to ES like this. If you drive the ISS Yandex module, if you can if you run in the get config to redrive the ISS Yandex module, it may be useful to define some metadata so it can appear here. This LSS is IETF protocol, right? It's a routing protocol. It's a routing protocol for IGP like this. Do you think it is useful? Do you want to define such a metadata?
Well, yeah, I mean, you can define whatever you want. That's how we wrote this, right?
Okay.
So if you're asking if we want to add certain tags, then yeah, I mean, I'm open to hearing any sort of types of tags that you might want to add. But again, the document is structured so that designers, vendors, or people with the devices and the servers can add the tags. It's allowed at all three stages.
Okay, so it's not the relationship to the lack of get config, like another PC operation, right?
I think so.
Well, so just to clarify, I think was your question that if you do a GET request, then you could get, Michael, this is for you actually, that if you do a GET request, you would get annotations of the data coming back as to what the tags are of that instance data coming back. Was that your question? Which I'm not sure that's that
No.
useful.
No, that wasn't what we were shooting
I think
for.
there'd be a lot of noise, a lot of extra data coming back. You probably don't-
There are other mechanisms to actually tag instance data, right, too. This is working on the schema level. Okay, thank you.
Martin? Also, I'd like to ask everyone, please do join Etherpad, even if you just add a sentence during the whole session, that's still helpful. I just sent the link to the list.
Okay, so this is a presentation of the Yang data extensions document. I think it was adopted actually after the last IETF, right? So it's a new version of the document. So just a very, very quick recap of the problem and the solution. So the problem is, of course, that we have this Yang data extension statement in the REST-conf IRC, but it has been used for a lot more than just within the REST-conf protocol. People are using it in various kinds of drafts. And it has a couple of limitations. So one limitation that was noted in the notification drafts was that the structure cannot be augmented. The structure must define exactly one container, which might be limiting in some cases. And you also have this possibly a bit weird dependency to the REST-conf IRC. So this draft defines two new extension statements. Yang data, which is more or less a copy of the one from REST-conf, with the exception that we lift some of the limitations that I mentioned. Doesn't have to be a single container, and there are some other limitations that are listed. And then the new statement that is called augment Yang data that can be used to augment one of these structures. So there are two open issues. They were briefly discussed on the mailing list. We would like to try to close them. So one question was, should we also define the statement something like uses Yang data, so that you can have your structure, you can augment it, but you can also use this structure just like you can use a grouping. So there are also some drawbacks for this. We already have groupings that you can use. So we would have two different mechanisms for defining reusable structures. If we did this, another problem is that if we would do this as an extension statement, tools might not be able to understand it because tools are not required to understand all extensions. And it's generally a bad idea to define data nodes in extension statements. So I would propose, and I think that at least some of us authors propose to not do this, to just use whatever we have and use normal groupings and uses for this.
Kent Watson as the contributor. I think if you want to use groupings, the module designer has to anticipate that the grouping would have to be defined because they may not actually have grouping to begin with. So, but if they did that, that's great. If they don't do that, could schema mount be used?
Yeah, possibly.
And I think the motivating use
But
case
on the
for
other hand, I mean, so this Yang data extension, it defines a data structure that is not part of any data store or anything. It's something outside of data stores.
Right.
So schema mount stuff to data stores. So I wouldn't think that you could actually schema mount something that is defined in this extension. That would be a bit weird.
And I think the driving use case for this is that you have a Yang data structure that's been defined, and then you have yet another Yang data structure that wants to somehow make use of it to put it inside.
Right.
Composition of non-config or operational state data structures.
Yeah. Any other comments on this particular issue?
Well, Wilson Cisco, I prefer to your proposal here. Just keep it simple. I would rather not have multiple ways of doing the same thing if you can avoid it. But at least initially, maybe ship it originally without it. And if a requirement comes up or a definite use case, then it can be added in later.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Kent, again, perhaps a way that we could address this would be in this draft say that anyone who wants to to use this Yang data extension, that they must create a grouping and then use the grouping, and thereby ensuring that downstream compositions can occur by using the groupings also.
Yeah, I don't know. I wouldn't want to require the usage of this and groupings.
Jürgen has a comment. I prefer that extensions do not define data nodes. That's via Jabber.
Okay. All right. The second open issue is about the error info thing. We have seen also in the notification drafts that the Yang data structure is used to define error info structures. So error info in the RPC error is an open structure. You can put any structure in there, but there's really no way of defining what that structure would look like. So one proposal on this was to maybe add or maybe use this Yang data statement to define the error info structure, just like they do in the notification draft, but then also add another extension into the RPC and actions that would tell you which error info structure can actually occur for this particular RPC. Currently, we'll have to do this with description statements, plain text. This might be a good idea, but as someone pointed out, it kind of expands the scope of this document. It's probably not included in the original scope. And there are a couple of issues. If we do this for error info, should we do this for error tag? Should we think about this in a more general error handling document, maybe? And the last thing there, can we assume that all protocols that would actually implement such an RPC also has an error info built in their reply? I don't know. So personally, I would also suggest that we wait with this, try to finish this document as it is, and then possibly come back to this issue. Any other comments?
Alex Clem, just having actually lived through this issue, I just want to mention this is something that I think is important to be solved. So I don't know where the right place to solve it. If it's not here, somewhere else, sure. But I think that is really actually something that is missing actually in the framework, and we need this.
Yeah, I think probably this is the right place, right? The question is, should we do it in this document and delay it, or should we publish this document and maybe work on this in a separate document?
Joe Park, Cisco. As someone who would have benefited from this in some of my work, had it been available earlier, I would say ratify this and then use this to focus on something more error-focused in a different document.
Okay.
Kent, as chair, if we don't do it now, then we would have to spin up another effort almost immediately, because there are dependencies from the Yang push and related drafts. They need to have this, don't they?
I mean, so do this. That would be the error info mapping. I think it's okay to do it as they do today in notification draft, that is in text, right? I mean, this would be a formal way of doing what they are doing and describing in plain text. But I think that this, we can, I think it's more important to publish the base draft with the Yang data extension so that they can use that, and possibly the augment Yang data.
And since the authors are in the room, everyone's agreeing? Okay, thank you. The Yang push and related draft authors are in the room, and I just want to ensure that they were also okay with that decision to defer making it programmatic to know how what the structure was inside.
Right. So for the time being, if you need something like this, you would use the Yang data extension to define the structure, and then you would explain in text in the description statement of the RPC or action that that particular area for structure is actually being used. So we wouldn't have a formal way of doing it.
As for your push for the time being, we should keep it as is. This is just for future, because there will be other people behind us who will have the same issue.
Sure. Yeah.
Just as a reminder, we do have people remote and we are recording, so please use the mic and state your name.
Okay. So last slide. Next steps. We have some smaller fixes, editorial, inconsistent terminology, and so on. If there are any other comments from this meeting or on the list, otherwise we're going to publish a new version and ask for working with last call, hopefully on that version.
Okay. And next up, we have Joe Clark.
All right. In Singapore, I presented on this proposal to introduce the concept of semantic versioning for modules, specifically because even though Yang 1.1 stipulates we should not have backward incompatible changes between modules, that implies that a module must be perfect out of the gate. And that's not the case. That's certainly, we've already seen examples where there's been issues between the standard and the implementation that made it hard to move forward with Yang. Vendors are struggling with this as well, in that we, coming from a vendor, sometimes we have to release backward incompatible changes. And in the standards bodies, if we strive for perfection, we get in the way of good and we delay. And delay means people will go elsewhere looking for the solution. So we have proposed an alternative method whereby we introduce a major.minor.patch, where major introduces this idea of backward incompatible changes, minor introduces new features, but backwards incompatibility is maintained, and patches bug fixes. So that's level setting. That's what we talked about in 100 in Singapore. Since then, besides adding Balish to the list of authors, we've added some additional text that kind of rounded out some of the use cases, added some additional justification, and also saying that, sometimes a new module name may be required. For example, when there is an overwhelming change to the schema, or there's some organizational shifts. We also added some augments, and admittedly, these augments, if you're reading version 03, they do not refer to the BIS version of IETF Yang library, so we have to fix that. But we added augmentations to be able to add this module version or the semantic version into IETF Yang library. We also identified kind of a terminology issue with deprecated and obsolete, especially when you look at them as an API contract. They tend to lend themselves to a may or may not type of language, which for a contract just doesn't do very well, meaning that the client, it's up to the client to kind of figure it out. Just fire and see what you get back. That's really not what an API contract should be. So we propose new definitions for both deprecated and obsolete, where deprecated nodes must still work as defined, and it serves as a kind of a foreboding warning that this will go away or could go away. And obsolete says the server must remove this node from the implementation, and any client trying to dereference the node gets back a specific error is identified there with the operation failed because you're dereferencing an obsolete element.
Hi, Joe. The one question, this is Ken from Juniper Networks. When you're deprecating, is there an ability to specify a time duration for, like, it will be, potentially obsolete in 1 year, something like that?
So we, in the draft, we talk about a kind of a heralding of deprecation. We it's a good comment. We don't have a specific data element that we introduced for a time-bound deprecation, but we talk about it in the text as something that we should pre-warn or forewarn about a deprecation. So it's a good observation. We probably should ratify or formalize that a little bit more. Then we mentioned import by semantic version.
I wouldn't be in favor of actually codifying the requirement to put a date in the deprecation field. But
name,
Christian hops, by the way.
Oh.
But putting it in a description makes sense, right? I mean, putting it in some text that we plan to obsolete it at this point. That should be a choice somebody could make.
I want to ask a clarifying question, but if it's in response, the person in the back can go. Is it in response?
Dumb question. In regular software development, rather than a deprecation date, I get the version number that is going to deprecate. With IETF process, kind of dates are hard to predict. Version numbers can be managed.
Well, it's funny you bring up version numbers because that's what we're talking about here.
Chris, can I ask a question? So when you say you don't want a date, is that you don't want a date to be standardized, or you don't want a date from the vendor telling you when they're going to stop supporting it?
Actually, I was thinking of it as a implementer in this context, so that I wouldn't want to be tied to having to put a date for moving from deprecated to obsolete. I mean, you might want to deprecate something saying, this is not the way we want to do this anymore, and then you want to ship it to see how the market reacts, right? I mean, you know, like, you don't want to have to say, my hands are tied, I have to obsolete this now because I picked that date.
Well, if it's not codified and it's just what the vendor does, that will allow the vendor to do a nice market test. And if their users say there's no way we can accept it disappearing in 6 months, well, you'll change the date. So maybe it's a good thing to have
so
that.
then the date is useless, right? I mean, if it just revs anytime you want.
Well, the date means is expect this to disappear unless you come talk to us.
Or I mean, we'll definitely support it up until this date, but thereafter it might disappear.
What do we win by making the standard?
Well, it's a pretty common thing to see that in software releases. You
Or
know,
versions,
if you look at distributions, look at your like Linux distribution. You have the last
Linux.
date. What?
Arc Linux?
Whatever.
The rolling update.
Yeah. Well, a
There
lot
are
of distros have dates on which they'll stop supporting their version. And this, if we just allowed for that to be done, for the vendor to publish a date, it would give us that sort of equivalent.
Allow
function.
is fine. I'm just saying, don't standardize it. Don't require a date.
Well, okay, so don't make it mandatory true.
Yeah.
All right, that works.
But that's the thing, right? If you're a vendor and you know it will be deprecated, and you know the version, you can write it. But if you don't know, if you don't want to impose yourself a constraint, just don't do it, right? And by the way, in a text, it doesn't help, because we need tooling to be able to extract and get something out of it.
Yeah, I agree. Joe, could I ask a clarifying question on a previous slide?
On this slide, or this slide? Because I moved on and then went back.
Okay, it might be the next slide. I don't know.
This slide. I haven't presented that slide. It's one of these two.
I'll wait to the end,
Okay.
because then we'll see where we are.
So it's good. The conversation is great. Let's bring some of that to the list as well. The next thing we want to mention is import by semantic version. We talked about this a little bit in Singapore. We admittedly, import by revision is seldomly used, probably ineffective. It's way too specific. You have to say I need this version or this revision of the module and only this revision of the module. Something like this import by semantic version, if done right, would give us more granularity to allow us to say import by revision X, a major revision X, and any major revision or any minor and patch revision of X, or to import even specifically by X, Y, Z if we wanted to. And this also allows operators to understand the interdependencies, the relationships between those modules, and helps them from a tooling standpoint understand where their tooling might break. So it's important, and it allows them to understand that if I move to this, I'm going to also have to add or support these additional modules. So we're also saying that the module version substatement should be a substatement of import, and we should not include both revision and module version. And in fact, import by revision should just be discouraged or just killed, forgotten about. It's not to say it's perfect. We want more discussion on things. We have some, we've identified some open issues, and sounds like we're going to have a few others. Do we need to include by SEMVer as well? Should we go back and do kind of a post analysis and generate a derived semantic version for existing IETF and IANA modules? And whose responsibility is it to do that? And what about reflecting in a module where it does change the name as to what the previous module was? So if the module's name changes, how can we reflect that this module replaces, module bar replaces module foo, for example, so that tooling can maintain that linkage? Because as Benoit just pointed out on the previous comment, we have to keep the tooling consistent. Simply doing this in text doesn't help tooling. We out of scope feature and release bundling, and we also mentioned, as we mentioned last time, do we want to change the file naming notation to recognize semantic version?
Jason Stern here, just a comment on the third bullet about replaces module. I kind of like that idea, and I can see it for simple one-to-one replacements. We have to think about whether we want to bother with cases, or if modules are split, then I don't know if that would quite work, because you'd have two new modules that are replacing one old one. You have to say, well, this is replacing part of. You have to just consider 1 to 2 splits and 3 to 2 splits, and how that may or may not be useful. For one-to-one, I like this concept, so tooling can see, can follow the link between the modules, but have to think about non-one-to-one splits.
Yeah, how do we, maybe you would have to group them or something to show that both of these modules are required to replace.
So my comment was on the SEMVer. I think you can leave it here. I think some of the stuff you're looking at is useful. What I don't understand, I think the SEMVer thing, I don't see why we need it, right? Because we're not using the patch at all, right? So really talking major and minor. I'm sure you've heard this comment before, but I mean, the module name is the major. If you just standardize the actual end of the text, like say colon version number at the end of the module name, then you have a way of tracking the replaces, you know, the relationship between the major versions, right? Because it's strip the colon number off, and you have the base module, and then the version number comes after. And then revisions are your minor.
Lou Berger, I really like that approach because it also it addresses the issue of a server needing to support older and newer clients at the same time, so it gives you a nice transition timeline.
Exactly.
So the changing the module name,
it's not really changing the module name, it's that we're now defining a new semantic to the path, to the XPath. It's encoded, you're encoding your major version there. That's, just think of it as an encoding of it happens to be a change of the path, but really it's just an encoding of the major version.
okay, but it doesn't necessarily take into account, so the import by and being able to be granular in terms of, or I shouldn't say granular, I should say broader in terms of what I want to, how I want to combine modules, or say these are the modules that I require, and I can take this breadth of version.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think you're addressing the case where you have you actually have two, in your proposal now, you have two major versions, right? You have really big major, which is a module name change, and just backwards compatible only major change. which is your Semver major. I don't think that's a distinction we need to make, right? I think a backwards incompatible change is a backwards incompatible change. I don't get like well, this is a really big one.
So, Rob Wilton, just to speak back to that point, one of the cases that came up for where a patch level is useful is like errata on a published YANG module where you might be modifying, for example, a description statement there, but it's useful to say it has changed, but the change is sort of insignificant. But you still actually notify the change there. So that's one use case. I actually want to just go back onto your previous slide, possibly. So I had a comment here that doesn't this effectively require a new version of YANG, a new revision of YANG to achieve this? So I like this idea of doing semantic versioning, but I guess there's a question to, if we were to allow this, wouldn't we require a new version of YANG, and what would be the process to do that?
I guess I have 3 comments to the previous discussions. So, actually, first one is about that include by Semver, or how you call that. So it's on the next slide, probably.
This one?
I would suggest not to introduce this because I believe, well, submodules have their share of problems. And I believe if they are used, then they should be really tightly coordinated, and the revisions can be included in YANG library information. So I believe this is not necessary to do, and it will only complicate this thing. So that's one. Second is actually 2 responses to what Chris said. I believe that the patch number may be useful sometimes. Earlier today, we discussed some way how to implement errata that are published for an RFC, for example, how to implement them in a new revision of a module. So I think if we have this patch part of the semantic version, then it might be possible to keep the RFC unchanged, and only if it's really minor change, just to change this patch level and update the module, for example, at INR repository, and keep the RFC as it is. That might be one possible use. And then regarding the idea of encoding the major number in the module name, one problem with this is that it will change. It will change also the namespace that we use. In the beginning, there was some discussion that perhaps we might also include the revision string in the namespace URI, which was possible, but the decision was not to do so, so that the namespace URIs stay as stable as possible. So that this would change this initial decision, I believe. So I would actually prefer your solution to have just the normal standard Semver numbers.
And to your first point about there is a companion or another draft on using a semantic version development type process where we feel the patch version is very useful for things like those types of micro changes.
The patch, I've heard a lot of good reasons. I think maybe, yeah, okay. But the major to the namespace, now I'm speaking as an operator, right? I want the namespace to change. It's backwards. It's not compatible. That's the whole point of changing the name, right? It's not compatible. I can't deploy and run a client against something where there was a backwards incompatible change.
Actually, I was one who proposed to encode really the revision date in the namespace URI, but there were other people that were strongly against.
Sorry, Chris, can you come to the mic?
Right. I wouldn't want revision in the namespace because it's not changing it's compatible, right? So I can still control that device even though it's a newer version. I don't want the namespace to change them, but for a major change, I can no longer use my client to control it. So I want it to change. but only the major.
Yeah, but the idea was, yeah, maybe to keep the URI stable even if the changes are major. So, but you probably mean changes that do not follow the rules for updates of modules. Yeah, that might be.
So I should have queued up this presentation by saying that there is actually another presentation following this, which is yet another proposal. And so Chris is actually a third proposal, which you don't actually have a presentation for. He just sort of took it to the mic. But so we are going to have sort of a bake-off, if you will, after Joe's and Mike's presentations.
Or at least a discussion, because it's not clear to me that they couldn't be used together, so.
Oh, yeah.
Just to remind you that already we allow incompatible changes without name changing. So that doesn't work even today. And changing a name is rather big, and people like to see the connection. So I like this version for that reason.
Martin Oakland, I'm going to second Rob's comment here. I think you're making pretty fundamental changes to the Yang language. So if we were to do all this that you propose, you probably need a new version of the language. That said, I think some of the things that you brought up, like the definition of deprecated and obsolete and how to detect that, that's certainly a problem. So I would like to see something in that area.
You're kind of getting further and further away from the microphone as you're talking.
I think I'm done. But these are pretty fundamental changes to the language, so that's my main point.
So just to sum up Martin's comments, he says, yes, there's probably a need for a new Yang version, but he thinks the change for deprecated and obsolete is something that should definitely be pursued.
A new Yang version or a new Yang subversion? I think two problems. One is...
Name, please.
Tom Petch. There are two issues. One is that we're in the process now of producing a second version of an awful lot of modules by virtue of MMDA. So if we'd had this a couple of years ago, we'd have a use for it to tell MDA models from non-MDA models. So I think, in a sense, this is a year or two too late. But more fundamentally, as a user of software, hardware, microcode from many different manufacturers, all of whom use version numbers, some use 3-tier as you're proposing here, I know that I have no idea what a version means until I've asked the manufacturer what they mean by it, because every manufacturer has a different sense. And usually I find they're tied to marketing. That when a manufacturer wants to make a big push, wants to say, this is something new, definitely must have it, he ups the version number. If he wants to try and hide it and pretend this is not increasing incompatibility to cause you problems, then he just tweaks the patch level or some minor number. So to me, it's a marketing tool. It's been much abused. If we're going to do anything with it, we really have to nail down very precisely what we mean by a change of version, a change of level, like NMDA is a change of version. Nothing else counts unless we change Yang again.
And this draft does be very specific in what these version components mean.
Yeah.
Specifically to your point.
But it has to be nailed down in an objective manner that we all are going to sign up to and agree with and implement for the next however many years.
As a reminder, we do also have extensions, and they do have constraints, but depending on what solution we come up with, an extension might be equally applicable. Sorry.
So the final point, I know I've read the draft that's being presented next. There's clearly thought that this is an important area for discussion. We've had a slew of people come up and comment on it. People do want to work on this.
Microphone, please.
Martin Oakland, you have many things in your draft. So when you say this, you mean and.
Okay.
So everything, or?
Yes, I mean everything. I mean semantic version, handling backward incompatible changes, and being able to reflect those and their dependencies or effect on other modules.
Okay, can we ask the question about who thinks working on a sub-portion of what he talked about?
Chris, just keep in mind, the presenter is asking these, the chairs are not, and the chairs have said that we're going to have a discussion after the next presentation. So he's welcome to ask whatever he wants. We have
Okay,
time.
well,
But,
It might be
keep in
useful
mind
to
the
get more
context.
hands.
So Benoit Claes, speaking as AD for the last time. In the ops area, I made a little bit of a Yang state of a union. And what I've been observing, not only in the IETF, but in different SDOs, with the last instance being the hackathon, with different SDO having like changes to their Yang modules that were supposed to be standard. And with the new validators, they don't work any longer. So what I've been seeing in different SDOs, open source projects, and also vendors, that we need to change the way we've been working, right? We could say we have a good metric because the number of Yang modules produced in RFC are going up. Well, no, we need to optimize this. And if we believe that we have the perfect Yang modules from now on because we're an RFC, this is just wrong, right?
Mahesh Shetanlani. I can't believe that I'm even suggesting this at this time because I'm sure it's going to come back and bite me on it. But is there anything in the draft that actually talks about how draft authors are supposed to keep track of the major minor changes? Is there a recommendation on, is this being done in a GitHub? Or is it just physical, somebody going and changing some numbers in a file and then somehow they're being tracked?
So there is, as I mentioned, I hate to say companion, but there is another draft about using semantic version from a development standpoint. In fact, there was talk in Singapore about running a pilot of, in fact, I thought you were part of that. So yes, it will come back to bite you. And in this draft, in terms of how one determines what is, say, backwards compatible, the concept of this derived semantic version, we've been using in a tooling standpoint algorithmically to determine when the major, when the minor, when the patch version would increment. So it's not just haphazard, there's a formula for being able to determine that.
So Jürgen has a comment from Jabber. I agree with Martin that changing the versioning has far-reaching impact and requires a new version of Yang. And I'm not quite sure if that came in before or after my comment about extension. So.
Okay.
And Kent, I think just as a clarification, Chris said earlier that minor was a form of breaking backwards compatibility and major a form of breaking backwards compatibility, but that's not what you have in your draft.
Right.
Minor is actually backwards compatible.
Yes, minor is backwards compatible.
Only when you break backwards compatibility is that when you go to the major. This is what's in the draft.
He's saying you didn't understand.
Oh, I didn't understand that. Okay.
Yeah. Jason Stern, I think what he's saying is we have two forms of major breaking, changing the module name and changing the major version.
Right, that was his other proposal, so that was an alternate proposal, but or maybe I misunderstood.
Even without it,
Okay.
you still have that.
So as the chairs pointed out, there's going to be additional proposals and talk about this, but it sounds like in general, the topic of the topics of deprecated and obsolete and how do we handle versioning and the known changes that we're going to face with Yang modules. This is something that the working group wants to work on or wants to broach as a topic.
It's okay, you can raise your hand if you like.
Okay?
There's a fair number.
Yeah.
That's all right.
Hello everyone, this is Michael from Huawei, and today I want to introduce a Yang data model for the model version management. As we know, the NMDA defined a set of new data store, and this NMDA also requires the model to comply with its architecture. that requires many modules need to be updated or restructured, especially for some module is already be published. So we believe this MDA is really good work and it can really improve the management efficiency. But it really brings some issues. For example, how to support backwards compatible and how to indicate that every module's revisions update detail. To address these issues, we propose this document and define a Yangtze module to help the user to track the module's update to reflect the every revision's update details. And this module can serve as a designer aid, so can help the user to improve their designer or management efficiency. And the next several slides, I will introduce the scenarios and how to use this Yangtze module to address this problem. Okay, the first scenario is this module can serve as a module designer aid. For example, if I want to define some Yangtze module, such as example 4, and in this module, I want to import some modules like IETF interface. These modules may exist multiple versions, and before the design time, I may not realize, okay, this module has been updated, and this module some leave already be deprecated. So maybe I can make some mistake to define the interface to define the leaf which is point to some path. This path already be deprecated in the listed version of the interface Yang module. If I run in this modules, maybe I can receive some errors like here. So I may confuse why I receive this error and what mistake I have to. So if we have some tools to help me to reflect every revisions update, it maybe can help me to quickly fix this error. And if I read this update details before design time, maybe I also can avoid this error. So I believe this module, if have a Yangtze module to reflect every revisions updated detail, it can help me to improve the designer efficiency. The second scenario is this module can serve as a management aid. For example, some Windows system can support multiple revision of a same module, but the system can only implement one revision. And how to make this decision and how to do this work? Here, like the left graph, this system can support the multiple interface revision, and if I can provide the tools to help the system management to understand which revisions status, that is, what is a backward compatibility and what is change logs, and it can help me to make the decision which revision should I implement. And I also can understand which module this module related to the interface I need to be updated. If I synchronize the update, synchronize every related modules, then I can implement the latest version, or I can first implement the previous version and then do some such as this update or synchronize. Then I can modify to the latest version. Okay, the last scenario is this module can work as a tracker. So for some module designer, for their module, there may be really need to track the module which he import or which he depend on. the status. If I can provide the tools to tell the designer each version's changelog, it can help me to quickly synchronize the model which I am designer now. Okay, this is what the modules overview. In here, we provide entity module, and the module firstly it provides some basic information such as the module name, version, and with backward compatible information. And behind this basic information, we provide the module changelog. It presents this update detail from this version and the list version and the previous version. Here we define a leave change operation. It can be indicate what kind of update appear in the list version. For example, if we have deleted some statement, if we have moved some data node to some new location, or just we add a new statement or modify some statement. And also there is two cases. One case for some definition modify on the data definition, such as leaf definition, list, container, and a choice case. Every detail of modify on these nodes, it can be easily present in this module. And another case is for the some update which located in the identity definition, feature definition, type definition, such as grouping definition. This also need to be reflected in this module. And we also define RPC to help the user to compare any version of this same module to tell them what kind of update they have do in this version and one previous version. Okay. Here is some usage example.
Sorry, Michael. Sorry, Kent Watson as a Juniper, as a contributor. Why are you defining a top-level module instead of augmenting Yang library? Did you think about maybe augmenting Yang library?
Maybe I need to. Yes, sorry, I forgot to stage this. This model also augments the Yang library. It's defined some leaf to reflect the backward compatibility. Yeah. Sorry for that. Okay, here is some use case. Is present how to use this module to present the update of IETF interface module. The first graph is how to use module present, delete the state subtree, and the second is how to add a new feature in the another definition case. The third graph is to introduce how to use this module to present how to add a new substatement like a feature. The last is how to move some data node to a new location. Yeah. The next step, we would like to solicit more comments and maybe prepare another version. Based on comments and feedback, we can improve our document and optimize our young data model. Thank you. Any question?
Rob Wilson, Cisco. So I wonder if this is solving a different problem than the one in the previous presentation. That I'm not sure I see how this solves the sort of versioning issue. It's more maybe a Yang catalog extension type idea of providing more information about what changes have happened to a module. I don't see how to solve the versioning issue at all. And then one other thought of this is whether this is something that's useful to standardize or whether this is just something that could be provided by some tooling that did the diff between two Yang modules and just said, look, these are the changes between these revisions, which I think is useful. I think that's useful information to have, but whether a tooling solution would be better than a standardization approach, maybe.
I'm not really sure whether it is better to define the standardization or just define some tools. But we think if you can have this information of this document, it really can help the user to track the module's status and track the module's update detail. So whether it's standardization or whether it's a tools, maybe we can more discussion and the working group can make this decision. Yeah, thank you.
Joe Clark, Cisco. I agree with Rob. You have a Boolean node in there, backward compatible, but backward compatible with what? You kind of have to say. So we built as part of yangcatalog.org exactly, well, almost exactly what's in your draft. Meaning, and in fact, in your example in your draft, you actually have a source and a target semantic version. You have a 1.0.0 compared to 2.0.0. We built the tooling to do that, and what we found is semantic version doesn't stand alone by itself. You have to compare it to something. So having just a simple Boolean for a module that says, is it backward compatible, doesn't have as much information as saying, given these two versions of a module with this name, is it backward compatible? Is the newer one backward compatible with the older one? And what are those changes? And so I think from a tooling standpoint, there's huge value in this. We've already seen consumers like that, meaning they appreciate the output of that. But I don't know that alone that what you're solving, I don't know alone that the two, that our proposal and your proposal conflict, and I don't know that there's anything added that isn't solved in tooling.
Yes, I have read your document and I think it is a really good work. And I don't think there can, I don't think they have some overlap. I believe these two solutions can compatible with each other, and your solution can choose the user how changes the status, what is a big change, what is a minor change or patch change, and our solution we want to provide what the big change or patch change really are. Yeah, I think they can work together.
Did you answer both parts? So yes, they're compatible, but what about the tooling? Is it what's the value added above and beyond what tooling can do?
I was agreeing with Rob in that point that I think there's value here, but I see that I don't know that the standardization is needed. The tooling is absolutely needed. This output is absolutely needed because module consumers do appreciate it. I don't think that what I presented and what was presented here conflict, and B, I don't know, like Rob said, that it needs to be part of the server itself versus some external tooling.
So Tim Carey, Nokia. So as a module provider, right, I would assume that the expectation here is that you would expect me to have to develop these artifacts, right, of these particular modules of saying I moved this node from here over to there. I took this node and increased its range from X to Y, and put all these together in some sort of change log, if you will, in order to be consumed by some external entity. And you actually expect me to do that. That's the problem. Is that this requires two things for this tooling to work. One is for people to provide it, and the other is to have the ability to consume it. I would suspect that if we're having problems with vendors already that say I'm not even going to adhere to a major minor patch, guideline, that they're going to be able to build all these individual constructs and artifacts. So it's a great idea. I'm just wondering if indeed the industry would be supportive of that as they define their modules and have that particular rigor in place, or require that particular rigor. And that's my biggest concern with something like this. Is I've been through this, down this rabbit hole once before, and you're not going to come out on the bright side of it.
Maybe. Are you, is the last one?
Yeah, that's the
Okay.
last slide.
So, okay,
Can-
yes, I guess this is the, any more questions for
I
Michael's
just wanted to jump
presentation?
in and address that. So Joe Clark again, from a tooling standpoint, what we've done, we don't expect any vendor to produce these artifacts. What we've done in our tooling at least is note the differences, use Pyang, and show you a report of Pyang, and then show you a contextual diff of the module. So we don't expect any additional tooling. We're just showing you what tooling is available, what those differences are. Not to this degree, but at least you get an idea of what changed from a backwards and compatibility.
Jason Stern, kind of on a similar line. I guess I'm wondering who's going to consume this detailed information. I can see that being useful for a programmer of a client in order to say, oh, I'm going to support a new version of the module. Let me see what all the diffs are, and I can adjust my client. But that's kind of a upfront implementation time information. I'm not sure whether a client would dynamically want to query this list, and then is it really going to be able to use that list in some way that's different than just looking at the new Yang module that says this leaf is obsolete, this leaf is deprecated? I'm not sure what a client's going to do with this list of dynamic information it queries from a node. Find it hard to imagine what it can do with it.
Kent, as a contributor, I was actually thinking the same thing. It seems like programmatic release notes. And but already if you have this as a standard and there's an RFC and then there's a biz to that RFC, you're going to have something like changes from, or, there's going to be a section that's describing the changes that were made from the last RFC, which you would then capture some of these kinds of details, the release notes. So why is this needed programmatically, I guess is the question to Jason's comment.
Yeah, so maybe, designer may have some simulated system and I need to solicit every reversion of this module, or their system should support every reversion of this same module. And then they can check the list of every change log of the reversions and make sure, okay, every related module it can be centralized or updated. Yeah,
All right, thank you, Michael. Now, with the discussion, since I think we've all agreed that this is compatible with the other Simver and Chris's proposal, but yet different, it's solving a different problem. We probably, the discussion really should just be between those two proposals, the Simver and name mangling of the module name. And 10 minutes, you think? Is good enough?
Yeah, why don't we see where we are after 10 minutes of discussion? If we, we won't artificially cut it at 10, but if the energy's dying down, we'll try to wrap it up and move on to the other presentations that we have.
Michael Abramson. So I don't know how to solve this. I can just, as a user and operator in here, say, I've had a lot of pain when it comes to going between different versions. Like we're developing Yang models. This is a free open source project. I'm putting it on this home gateway. So I'm revving the models very quickly because we're developing it, and I'm interacting with an NMS that needs to have changes there. I've had so much pain in the whole development process because we're trying to create one NMS to run everything. So there is any kind of device coming in has to be compatible with whatever is on the NMS. So I have different versions of, in my case, the home gateway, that support different versions. We're trying different prefix, different namespaces, different model names, and it's just I've had a lot of pain, and I don't know if this is like special property of the NMS we're using or something, but having this over time, how this works, how to work with this, yeah, I think we need to do more.
I think this goes to the importance of the problem.
Yes.
And I believe we already think it's important. In fact, our AD.
Right. Okay. So that's
Well,
okay. Then I should stop talking then because I'm just want to.
Hearing all views, I think, is good. I mean, maybe I'm cutting Kent off here. Sorry.
No, I'm agreeing with them. That's an important problem to solve.
Hearing all views, and particularly user views, I think is really good. And if you have any insights on specific areas you'd like to see addressed within that, that might be something that'd be helpful.
Yeah, I don't know if we need some kind of implementation advice for like what not to do and so, because like I have had, the device is, people are testing software upgrade, downgrade, so the device is flipping back and forth between the models it supports. It only supports the old one, and then it only supports the new one, and like, how do you handle that in the NS? I don't know if that's something we need to do, or if that's obvious, but the whole thing, in like, we're following the IETF process, so we're implementing different, as the draft is progressing, we might say, okay, we're going to implement, whatever's in the draft right now. Two revisions later, the model is changed, and then it's like, okay, what do we do now? Should we handle this with different prefixes and different model names, or how should we do that? Like, how do we do this as a more of a, I don't know, DevOps approach or something, where we're continuously changing things? Because it seems to me that so far the whole Yang model thinking has been, you put in a lot of work, you drop the model, and this is now static for a long period of time. You might add a few things to it, but there are no major changes. This is actually not what's happening. I think the real world is a lot messier than this.
So I work with Michael, but I want to echo, I guess, sound another one of my colleagues' real pain points. This is not particularly an IETF thing. It relates to modules and Yang. It doesn't relate to something that I think the IETF can change, but one really painful thing that we've had is that vendors are changing the modules that they ship, like with every release in incompatible ways. I mean, it's really obnoxious. So we see, basically, we have to treat every software release as all of the modules break, right? Now, one vendor just doesn't change anything, so we just get, the module doesn't indicate that it's major changed, but it is. We have another vendor who just puts a incrementing number in the namespace, right? So it's like the extremes opposite of, every single rev we get, it says it's backwards incompatible, when in fact it might not be. It might be compatible. So anyway, speaking to the vendors out there, right? Stop doing that. It's really painful, and eventually, right now it's not affecting us buying your gear, but it will really soon.
So Kent, as a contributor, I think Juniper is at fault with this as well. Every release, essentially it's module name or Junos _ release number, and there's no guarantee that anything's backwards compatible, because we can't. But going to your other draft, the module tags draft, so there's standards modules, and then there's vendor-specific modules. So maybe this would be very beneficial for standards bodies, right, which is our personal pain point. And then vendors can continue to be backwards compatible every release as they are today.
Balázs Lengyel Eriksson. I'm speaking both as a device vendor, but also as an OSS vendor, because we do that as well. What our OSS wants is that have some simple data, like SAMware, where you can immediately determine, is this backward compatible or not? Okay, anyone can lie and do ugly things, but theoretically, you can very fast determine if it's compatible or not. And then you can try to use your software that was prepared for the other compatible version, and that's fine. Today we don't have that because of deprecated and obsolete kills backwards compatibility practically. On the other hand, I don't want to change the module name or the namespace, because all my scripts, all my software will send down that namespace and that module name. And very often, some parts of the module is changed that I don't care about. It might be incompatible, but I don't care about. I want to know that there's a change, I have to investigate it, and then I can decide what to do about it. But if I am forced to change all my scripts and software because every time the module and the namespace changes, that's bad.
Can I ask a follow-up question on that, Lou? When you say you want to discover what's changed, Do you want to do that with the device, or would you like to do it with some offline mechanism, like a catalog-based mechanism?
What I want is to immediately notice if there are backwards compatible changes. Or
So
backwards incompatible
you'll get the
changes.
version number from
Yeah.
let's say, the device.
If I get the sampler, that's good for me. What the changes are, you can't find out if a module is compatible or incompatible really problematically. Very often we have the case when the model is not changed, but the behavior behind the model is changed. So you will anyway need to study it manually. So, and I would say that this detailed analysis is very, very useful, but I would say that yes, that's an offline tooling. A catalog or PI.
So, okay. So what Joe described would actually work for you in terms of the current catalog behavior.
Actually, I'm one of the co-authors, but
Well,
I'm one of the authors on that document.
okay,
Yes.
great, thanks.
Benoit, I want to answer 2 points. One of yours about native models, because, we speak about standards. There is this entire world where we've got vendor-specific models that are generated. So, and that's a fact, right? So whenever we upgrade, well, they migrate. So we could play tricks telling it on the same model so that we will be respecting 7950 on the update, right? So, but it's not working like in a DevOps way. So, what Joe mentioned about the catalog, what we're about to do in a catalog is you give like 2 iOS versions. We're going to query that because the metadata will figure in a catalog and tell you what models are not backward compatible. And yes, as Balázs was mentioning, sometimes it takes a manual process. So we show you the dips of the tree and the modules. So, yeah, it should be working offline, I believe. Now, the second thing I want to answer is, Mikael, your point about feeling the pain. Yes. I think that we need to change a lot of things here. Let me try to be bold. I would even try to say that we must be changing the process here. And it's easy for me to say since I won't be the AD tomorrow evening. But we need to be DevOps focused in ops here and be focusing on those young models. What we did, because we did all the experiments that we thought about in the young catalog. In there, we provide you like the health metric of a young module, right? So whenever you go and you tell us every single draft, I go and implement it, and it changes things, my script, etc. So the process should be changed in a way that, we've got those health metrics like it validates. It works with the other young modules. There is code. It's imported and all this. And only at that point in time, then you know that it's kind of ready. You feel it's ready to be implemented. Now, ideally, if I want to go one step further, can we just run our IETF process directly into this young module? This is what Joe was mentioning with the companion draft there. And maybe this is like we run the Semver on the draft in GitHub, right? That would be at least, I hope, helping you in the development process. But that's a big change, right? That's a big change.
Charles Ethel. So a few different comments. One, I agreed very much with what I think Chris brought about. We don't want 2 different ways of saying major change or incompatible. We don't really care big versus small. It's really, is it non-backward compatible or is it backward compatible? That's the critical thing to get out of that. And as to how to encode that, whether it's a different URL or namespace or it's actually encoded in the model, the comment that, Balázs? Comment that Balázs brought up made a lot of sense to me for going with Joe's method, because I could certainly see an operator wanting to do that. And then the last thing is that there was a comment about, this maybe being too late in some regards. I think the need for this type of thing is only going to increase. Seeing a lot of requests for, hey, we need to move faster. When we need to move faster, we're going to see even more need to change models. So I think whatever mechanism we do, we've got to make sure that it works very well for lots of backward compatible changes, that's going to work very, a low touch, easy way to deal with that. Because, the faster we try to put out Yang models, the more we're going to have to change them.
Okay.
So I want to follow up on some of the comments that were, sorry, this is Kent as a contributor. I want to follow up on some of the comments that were made earlier during Joe's presentation about how if we were to try to implement it, it would require a newer version of Yang, Yang Next. And if that's true, that would be a long-term solution. We really need a short-term solution. So can we work, what is the short-term solution that we can go for?
Well, Sanjay Erickson, actually, we are already doing Yang extensions for exactly the same reason in our system. So why not IETF? It works.
So you're saying Yang extension as opposed to the new Yang version?
Yes, that's what we are doing. We can't do a new Yang version in Ericsson.
Well, okay, so I'll tout that idea earlier, right? I don't think we need to change the language if we were to put some semantics on the URL, put the major in it, use the revision as the minor. I'm sympathetic to the people saying the patch number was useful, so maybe we need to come up with some way, so with already existing mechanisms, we can have the major encoded in the namespace and the minor is a revision. So then it's really just a way of capturing the patch change, right? To say, I didn't change anything but descriptions here, so don't worry, right? And I think that if we could do that in a compatible way, then it would be easy to push this through, right? And start benefiting from it.
Rob Wilton, I was just going to make the comment that there's only some parts of the solution that actually would require changes to Yang. So just adding in a semantic version as an extension or augmentation is fairly easy. It's if you want to have the import by revision by semantic version, that's the one that sort of changes the semantics of the language and require a new version.
Tom Patch. Again, when I said it's too late, bearing in mind that we do have currently revision by date, and the comment was made that's not much used, which does beg the question as why not. That is, we do have a form of version currently based on date. And if it's not being used, we need to know why it's not being used, why it's inadequate. And that was really driving my thinking when saying we're too late to try and impose a formal structure of major, minor, patch, and so on. If we've got data and we haven't used it, we need to look at that as well.
So Jürgen is actually in queue. That's okay. Namespace, this is from Jürgen. Namespace is used by XML. JSON uses module names for the namespace. So you have to change the module name for a major revision.
This is one. So that was a comment to Chris's proposal, or? I mean, so
Yeah.
essentially, if you encode the version number in the module, then you would also do the same in the namespace. So that's,
Can you lean in a little?
yeah, if you're adding this, major version number to the module name, you would also have to do it to the namespace, I guess,
Yeah.
is this comment. And of course, this is what the current Yang version says that you have to do. You have to change your module name and namespace if you do a major or non-backwards compatible change. So I was going to comment on what Rob just said. He said that if we just added the semantic versioning as an extension, we wouldn't have to change any Yang, or we don't have to change the Yang language. But if we add the semantic versioning with the semantics that has been proposed, I mean, we still need to change the Yang language because you wouldn't be allowed to ever update this major version, right? So you could probably do the minor and patch thing as extensions, but not major.
Yeah, I suspect, I mean, we have to look at the details, but I suspect you could also add Chris's as an extension. And because it would be compatible if you don't understand the extension, because it just looks like a new module.
Chris's is more a convention of what we already have.
Except that I think you would want to do inclusion by name still, where you don't care about the version, which means that changes the parsing of that. So it's a little bit more I think it's an extension, it's a little bit more than just an extension, convention, excuse me. To make inclusion work.
I was just saying, I wouldn't say that.
What's that?
I would not say that. That's a pretty major change, right? You're talking about like wild carding the version number. or
I thought
something?
you were talking, this is your idea.
No, well, that's what I'm saying. I'm not saying that. I just want the major version to be encoded in the namespace because it's what we already standardized, right? But it does give people what they wanted, which was some pathway, right? Like I went from it's the same base module, right? And I think that was one of the people's complaints, is that they couldn't tell. Like if you change the module name, you have no idea where it came from. So if we standardize the version at the end of it, we know, right? It's easy to see. Then you don't need to replace it too. Right there.
So while I think we expect what the answer is here, we're going to ask it anyway. How many think the working group should be working on the topic of handling model revisioning? I must have asked it the wrong way because I would. Actually, I want to hear from Martin why his hand didn't go up.
And that was most of the room.
Yeah, I expected everyone in the room, and we got a lot of people, but Martin like half raised and then went down. I don't know if anyone saw that in the back. And the question is, what does that mean? It maybe he didn't like the question.
Joe Clark, you said revisioning. I think versioning, just to be.
Yeah, I think I accept the clarification. I mean versioning. Without meaning a solution, by the way. I don't mean semantic versioning.
Yeah, I don't think that we should not discuss it, of course, but I'm not sure that we are ready to adopt anything or even,
We agree with you. Yeah. We agree.
Yeah, I think he's just Lou's just asking, is this an important problem to work on?
Yeah.
So, I mean, as Chris said, we have a solution today, right? So if we want to work on this, it probably means that the current solution is, we accept that the current solution is not good enough, so we need something else.
So I have to channel from the floor, and I'm going to from Jabber, and I'm actually going to start with an apology. One of the things Kent and I didn't do on the first slide, because he's not here, is forget to talk about Joel as being our new co-chair. So Joel is our new co-chair, and he's actually online, and he has a comment. So
can I just add quickly? Yeah, and we were going to, Joel, his IETF profile picture is actually rather humorous, and we were going to put it on the first slide, but we didn't know that would be acceptable. All right, and now his comment.
It's on the tools page if anyone's interested. Go look at the tools page, NetMod, and at Joel's picture. It's quite good. So his comment is agree that it is an important problem. So back to the queue.
Right. Michael Evans. So if Martin here is correct and we already have tools, then we're not good at using them and whatever is available right now. So then we need operational guidance on how to work with that and how to do that. So I can just say I have pain. I don't know how to fix it. Doctor, please make me better.
So we were going to ask, I think there's 3 questions, and then the next step was going to be working on and identify what problem we really want to solve. So maybe I'll ask the 3 questions, and then talk a little bit about next steps, and then open it back up to the floor, okay? Or you really want to make the comment?
I just want to say that, yes, our current solution is not good because of the deprecation obsolete problem, because I can't determine if it's compatible or non-compatible. And yes, because of changing the name for small incompatible error correction. So what we have, and the import revision was also a problem for a long time. So I think our current solution is not good.
I think the consensus in the room is that it's an important problem to work on.
Right. And I think the point that was made is we should clarify what exactly, what Martin's leading to, I think we should address as well, is what problem are we really going to try to solve here? So I think the first step in addressing this is capturing that. How many people would be willing to work on the problem and with the understanding that the first step is to define what problem we're going to address? So of those very reasonable number of hands, how many are willing to author text? Okay, we would like your names at the end of we got a reasonable number. Quite seriously, we'd like your names, send it to NetMod chairs. We're going to talk a little bit. Joel's not here. We can't make a definitive direction statement right here, but we're going to talk about maybe doing either an informal or formal design team. Obviously, we also have to check with our AD about that. But it seems like this is important enough, and we have enough people who are willing to work it that we could get a group together to help focus the effort. Martin is resisting saying something at the mic.
You're going to open back up to discussion.
Yeah. Oh, and now I'm done. So mic is open again.
All right. So you're talking about the design team for the problem statement?
It's a design team to go work the problem, and the first step will be the problem statement.
Okay.
And along with any design team comes a design team charter and deliverables, and so the question is are we going to do something formal, or just have these people say they're willing to work it, and they're going to go willing to work this week? Hey, we don't want to get in the way. Go do it now. Any other comments from the floor?
All right.
My apologies, or our apologies again to Joel.
And
With that, I think we're on finite state machine, right?
yes. So Nicola.
Hi. So this is the version 2 of a young model for finite state machine. So we propose this model with the aim of increasing the programmability of network elements, and we are thinking to apply this model in 3 use cases of applications. The first one is to pre-instruct optical transponders about reconfigurations in case of physical layer changes. The second use case is related to telemetry applications. The third one is related to performance monitoring through a network clustering approach. So let's go to see the first use case. Assume to have an active service connection. The SDN controller can instruct the optical transponders on the actions to do if something happens at the physical layer. So if a degradation happens, the transponders already know what to do and they can promptly react. So without alarming the SDN controller and waiting for computations, because they already know what to do. More details can be found tomorrow in the session of CCAMP. The second use case is related to telemetry. So the aim is to customize network data collection with the objective of reducing data bandwidth. So again, many network probes can be described through a finite state machine. So in this case, we can program the elements to trigger data sending, data telemetry stream only under specific conditions. The third use case is related to IP performance measurements on multi-point to multi-point large networks. The case of point-to-point transmission is included. Here, an SDN controller can calibrate how deep we can obtain the monitoring. So we can think about the alternate marking method for performance monitoring, and we can apply this into a clustering approach. So we can imagine to divide the network in clusters. So under normal conditions, we can think about large clusters, but if something happens, we can reduce the size of the clusters, going so more deep into the performance monitoring up to the flows. Again, a finite state machine, this can be modeled with a finite state machine where each state represents a specific subdivision in clusters. So this is the Young model. It's you can see the current state. Then there is a list of states. To each state, there is it's associated a list of transitions. For example, for the use case of optical transponder, a transition can be triggered with a bit error rate increase. The transition has a filter attribute which permits to further describe the transition. So with these attributes, we can put, for example, some thresholds on the bit error rate increase. And then to the transition, we associate some actions. For example, the change of modulation format or the FEC for the use case of transponder. The attribute execute actually perform this action. Then we go to a next action if present, and obviously to a next the next state when the transition is completed. So this model was originally presented was submitted in June, discussed first in Prague, in OPS AWG, then has moved to NetMod. With this version, we fixed some issues related to the syntax, and we'd like to ask for the adoption of this working group.
Hi, Jason Stern. Do you mind just going back to your previous slide? So just a general question. When you trigger an action and then and then you take an action, you call an RPC. So I assume the idea is this is going to do maybe a configuration change just as if it was any other management client. Like there's no special interface. It's just as if it was any other like NetComp client.
Speak in the microphone, please.
We need the microphone, please.
Microphone.
So for the use case of transponder, yes, there is a configuration action. So we reconfigured the modulation format, and the FEC. But well,
okay.
Then yeah.
So I guess one issue that comes to my mind right away is at the same time as this may be triggering, you may have a management station also doing configuration, which may have a lock.
Well, consider that once it's reconfigured, we can send another action can be implemented to send a notification to the controller.
No, this action, which is trying to do a configuration change just like any other client, is going to get blocked because the management system took a lock, is doing some edit configs, is doing a commit. That could take seconds or a minute or however long it wants. If this is just doing a standard commit like any other, a standard configuration change and commit like any other client, then it's going to be stuck behind any locks by any other management stations, right?
Well, we can think about how to handle these.
Okay.
Yeah,
I mean, I'll have to think about that, especially since your use case seems to be a very time-sensitive use case.
Okay, we can think about how to handle this issue in future. Okay, thanks.
Joe Clark, so in this example, and this is what I was kind of maybe related to the previous comment, what's to prevent, so in this case, the bit error rate increases and you call an RPC. What if nothing changes? This to me feels like a infinite state machine. It's sort of like you've introduced, where is your ability to do like edge triggering?
Well, if nothing changes, it means that no transition is triggered and we stay in the same state, in the current state.
Then would this continue to execute the RPC over and over?
No, well, no. If the transition is triggered, yes, we go to the action, we execute the new configuration, we go to the next action if present, then we go to the next state. We are in a new state, and let's see if a new transition is triggered or not.
Okay, I was thinking constant error rate increases with.
No.
Okay.
No, it could. Well, we set that filter attribute for avoiding this continuous loop. Yeah. Thanks.
From Huawei, as a description in the draft, actions can be executed in synchronizer or in parallel. So, not sure you are consider a situation that about the conflict. So, action A may be independent on the action B and should be executed in advance of action B. So there is maybe a detection mechanism that to detect this kind of conflict.
If I understand correctly, you said that about actions in sequence or in parallel.
Relationship of the dependent.
The
action A has the relationship of action B. So it I means action A should be executed in advance of action B.
We can execute actions in parallel. In sequence. As you see, there is the first action that recalls a next action. But we can also think to execute actions in parallel. It means that we have to define an action that intrinsically implies two actions to be executed in parallel. I'm not sure if I answered to your question. I answered? Did I answer? Okay, thanks.
Okay, so as NetMod chair, we actually have the author of the other draft in the room, and we're going to offer him to present his idea as well. But at the end of the session, that'll be the last presentation, as NetConf co-chair, he just presented his idea in the NetConf working group, and there we said we felt that he should bring it to the NetMod working group. So bring, just like you brought your draft from ops. You were later.
Yeah, I've seen the.
Okay. And then back to being NetMod chair or co-chair. So at the end of that presentation, we'll then see if there's an interest in the room to work on the problem. Okay.
So, regarding the adoption, what you said.
The next step is to talk with Igor. The next step is to talk with Igor offline, and hopefully we'll have time for him to present, but we may not have time. Okay. So we'll see. But either way, the next step is to talk with him and see if you can work together on those ideas.
Now we have Chin Wu.
Hello, my name is Qing Wu. The topic I want to present here is document convention for handling long line in artwork containing code. So thanks for shared for suggestion. Actually, early the title is actually expressing young in XML. example, but we think we also need to consider JSON cases. So we changed the title to make to cover these cases. So why this draft? Actually, this draft, when we actually work on L3SM, actually get this through FCQ, and one issue actually come up is we see in L3SMB actually there's quite a lot of example, XML example. Some of line are extremely long, so exceeded the line length limit actually usually set up 73 characters. So this, talking with L3SM design team, actually one solution we come up with, maybe we need to break line into several lines. But this actually is not allowed based on the young 1.0 or 1.0 defined in the UPC 7950. So also we can reference the UPC 6087. This actually it emphasizes actually example is extremely important. So they need to be validated by automation. So we also do some investigation in some existing already published UPC or some working group job that working in progress. Actually, we see the XML example or JSON example actually are documented in like a consistent way. So that's why we come up with this idea. We want to provide the document convention to avoid these kind of inconsistent issues. But we are here. We want to emphasize we have no change to the rules to present a young module in data files or on the wire. So what does this draft do actually? So we need to avoid each document to provide its own mechanism to document the XML example or JSON example. So we actually define several conventions. The first is the convention for split example leaf not value across the line. The second convention is about represent XML encoding of the metadata annotation. In addition, we actually define rules to passing the validated XML form example. And we also provide the boilerplate text to use when these conventions are used. So first, we can take a look at this example. Actually, in this example, we have long not label and long not value. So this actually exceeds the line length limit. So what do we propose? Actually, we can break down this leaf node value into several lines. Actually, so the broken line actually must be terminated with backslash and without any additional space before the backslash, and also without any character after this backslash. For the continuation line, it must start with white space offset at least 2 characters. So also we add a statement to indicate actually the document convention we define here actually is applied to this kind of example. So the second case actually is a more complicated case. In this case, we will actually...
Sorry, question at the mic? Yeah.
Yeah.
Previous slide,
Martin
please.
Brooklyn, so can you back up this slide? So the second bullet is say any continuation line must be indented with a white space offset of at least 2 characters. Is that in the line or away? Is that an example of that line?
Yeah. We give the example in example B. Yeah, we can see there's some indentation with white space at least 2 characters.
Yeah. So if you had 3 white spaces instead of 2, that would be allowed. But how would you know if that's 1 real white space or 3 white spaces that needs to be stripped? I mean, understand my question?
Pardon, can you repeat?
So you say that it will be indented with at least 2 white space characters.
Yeah, I think
So that means that
maybe not precisely. Maybe we actually meant here the example we just set 2 characters actually.
Yeah, I think it needs to be specified. How
Yeah,
many,
yeah, maybe.
Otherwise, you don't know if it's supposed to be
Yes,
white,
yes,
white,
yes.
white space or.
Yeah.
So the other problem is that in XML, in a leaf like this, all white space are important, right? So even in your first example, you actually have a new line first.
Yeah.
Right, so that should probably also be closed or escape, I assume. I mean, even if in the top example,
Yeah.
you start the whole thing with a new line.
Oh, yeah, that's maybe because I think in the draft actually, I think we already fixed this actually. Yeah, this here, yeah, it's not consistent. Thank you for pointing this. Yeah. So second example is more complicated. Actually, may include some backslash in the leaf node value. So in these cases, we set the convention is when the backslash appear in this leaf node value, the example must arrange it. So the backslash is not a final character in the broken line. Additionally, we have some case to apply to the metadata annotation. So here we give the example. We see actually the leaf node element that includes the metadata annotation. Actually, the line is extremely long, so we so the convention we set here is actually we broke down one line into the several lines. So similar convention applied to the metadata annotation here is so for example the continuing line must start with a white space offset here of the 2 characters. Yeah. So in addition, we different from the previous example. Actually, we also require the leading and training white space actually must be ignored. And so also we add a statement to indicate the convention we define here to apply to this kind of example. So next actually is the rule we define for to pass the valid XML example. Actually, we have 4 bullets actually. The first 2 bullets actually apply to the long leaf node value. The last 2 bullets actually apply to the metadata annotation. So you can read the detail in draft for this. So we also believe actually this is not the biggest problem in the world, but we think it's, we need to solve this. So for next step, we actually talk with the course. We think we need to add the JSON example. Also for the rule to define the passing the young defined data XML example, we should add the example validation automation by the tooling. So this is we plan to do for the next step. Yeah. Comments?
Kent, as a contributor. So first, I think this is an important problem to solve. If you have very long lines and you do a submission, IDNITs will give you an error. It's not a warning, it's an error that your line is too long. And in a lot of my drafts, especially the ones that contain base64 encodings, I mean, like there's almost a paragraph of text. So I do believe this is an important problem to solve. My second comment is I don't believe this is unique to XML. I think any artwork that contains long lines is subject to needing to be trimmed or dealt with. My third comment is my solution. I'm in the acknowledgement section. Some of this came from work that I've done already. My build scripts, when I'm compiling my drafts, essentially I have an ability to do a fold, a Unix command fold, and it'll automatically place the backslash and just it lays that out perfect. So it can go and into the draft easily. Now, it doesn't have the indenting, along a column or 2 space or 3 space. It doesn't have any of that, but it's readable and it's not subject to any particular coding syntax, XML versus JSON, it doesn't matter. And it's also very easy to reconstitute the original. So I think those are my comments.
Thank you.
Tom Batch. This is not a problem that's unique to XML. I mean, even if I restrict myself purely to RFC IDs containing Yang, then we have a line too long problem in the tree diagrams, which we've discussed to some extent already. We also have it in one or two modules in the path statements, where we get dot dot slash dot dot slash dot dot slash, and we end up going over the 72 characters. So we need a convention for that. And then stepping outside NetConf altogether, it is, in a sense, a solved problem that it crops up regularly in security area where you're trying to represent keys, and it matters that you can extract examples and they will work first time. You can't afford to get even a single space wrong. So it is, in some other areas, a solved problem, although that solution might not be ours. And in our own area, in our own specific game modules, I would suggest we've got 3 instances of line too long. And what I would look for is a standard, consistent approach that can apply in as many places as possible, rather than having half a dozen different ones.
Benoit Claes. I agree with you, it's a larger problem. But, in this, we've been talking about tuning a lot, right? We want to automate the validation of those examples and not do them manually. And this is where I'm coming from, where we should just focus on those Yang module to start with, Yang example to start with, and not try to make it like 2 rows. So the current statements. Make sense?
So Kent, as a contributor, just responding to your comment, I think what you're trying to say is let's keep it simple so we can get a solution out faster. But I would say this is a lot more complex than what I proposed.
Right, but I just want to have this for Yang examples, right? And not for everything which is like artwork.
Benoit, before you go away, before you walk away, come back. No. Do you think this is something that could just be solved through tooling? Do we need a document on it? Why not just solve it in tooling? I'm setting you up here. Of course, we can't hear the laugh, the off mic comments.
Like, it's a yes. But, maybe, but I've been dealing with some of those tools, and I see all these exceptions and all corner cases that this is not the biggest problem in the world, but just having a convention there would be way more helpful.
So Rob Wilson, Cisco, I think it's a useful problem to solve. I don't think we should spend a huge amount of time debating lots of different solutions. I don't think it's very complicated. I think we should just try and pick one that's quite simple to do and just move with it fast and just get it done and out of the way.
Yeah, Martin Björklund, I think we should do this. I think we should solve this problem because as you read all these documents, all these examples, if everyone comes up with their own ways of trying to solve this problem, it just becomes more difficult to review and check the examples with tools and all that. So having one single way of doing it makes sense. I also agree with Kent that I think that this can be a fairly simple syntactical change. It shouldn't be context dependent at all. It should just be a very simple syntax for doing the events.
All right, so how many people think that this problem is something we should solve in the working group? Looks like a reasonable number. How many think that this draft is a good foundation, a good starting point for the working group? I would say about the same. Out of curiosity, how many people have read the draft? Slightly more than either of those. So that's actually a good thing. Often it's less.
Do you want to ask how many people don't think it's a good starting point?
Sure. How many people would like to talk and tell us why they think it's not a good idea to start with this document?
Kent as a contributor, and I already did. I just think it's too complicated.
Well, keep in mind, it's a starting point. It's not saying that this is the final solution. It's saying that this is the framework we're going to be working under. So is it a reasonable enough framework to start working with?
No.
Okay.
Charles echoes. Sort of my comment was the same as Kent's, I believe. It just seems, I'm afraid that anything that we write in starting with this, it's going to be too complicated. I just like the very simple convention that Kent mentioned. That's what I've always done. That's kind of like Unix commands, what you do. And, commands. It just seems like there's a clear solution. I guess I haven't studied it enough to know what other solutions people are doing, but certainly introducing additional white space to make it look pretty I wouldn't go there. I think that's a lot of grief.
Okay. So I think it's clear that we'd like to have a solution in this area. Perhaps come back with what you think is the simplest form and check with Charles and Kent privately to see what they think before bringing it back to the working group. Does that work for you?
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, thank you.
Does that work for you, Ken? Okay. Thank you.
Okay, great. So the next presenter is Blaž. And this is the last presentation that's on the agenda that's posted, but as mentioned at the top, we're going to try and see if it's time for Alex Clem to present his draft, and then also maybe time for Igor to present his. Microphone.
Blaž Zanga from Ericsson again. This is a bit of a draft that is very strongly related to what I presented in the previous work group. So there are a number of capabilities of the server. On-change notification capabilities, just one example of them, that are available via Yang modules. IETF Yang library comes to mind, contains all the modules, revisions, features, whatever. NetConf monitoring also contains similar things. The CCamp group also proposes an alarm module that will contain server capabilities. Most of these capabilities are actually fixed in implementation time. So you don't need really the node to know them. Some might change, so it is reasonable to have them as in Yang module. But we need to know this information already in implementation time. NMS, Management System Development, wants to start before you get actually the node in your hands. Operators like, let's say, Vodafone, base their purchasing decision on things like, will you support radius feature in your node? So they want to know what features and what modules will be there. So let's document this, and as automation and tools will need to read this, and anyway, that's a better way to do. Let's do it standard Yang-based format. And that's why I propose to have Yang instance data files formalized. So this is data that could be fetched from a Yang module via RESTconf and NetConf or some other way, but we actually document this in a file. So it's very similar to what you would get for a GET operation. In this case, it's a Yang library where we document that radius authentication is supported. Actually, while documenting server capabilities, there is the reason why I started this. There's another strong use case for this, preloading data. When there's often defined default data, like default user groups and access rules, so let's say I define that in default you have a read-only operator, a security operator, and a system administrator. What areas would they be available? What areas should they be able to reach according to access control? And then you could document these in a file and sometimes even load this file into your system. Now this data may be stable, maybe static in a way,
or maybe they can be changed later on. But both are possible. So both for documenting the capabilities and both for preloading data, we need instance data format. We actually have that, so we don't want anything new. Base it on the get reply formats for both netconf and restconf. Add some metadata, because yes, if this is a set of instance data that belongs together in a way, then it should have a name, revision, a few other things. And also, sometimes, like Yang library or the alarm model, it will actually be configuration false data, so state data. So I tried to define or reuse more like two formats, one for XML. I put an instance data wrapper around it just to make it a single root, and also to carry the metadata, like the name of the instance data set, revision, description, potentially other data bits. And then you get what you would normally see in a Yang library, which very nicely defines actually what your Yang server will be able to do, all the modules, deviations, and other stuff. Similarly, you could have a JSON format. Happily, again, this is predefined for me. Only thing I did was put an instance data wrapper around it. And I stated that this is a get reply I would get for RESTconf data. At least that's about how I understand it. There was a proposal that you should be able to define the root resource somewhere, that's maybe in metadata, and then start your instance data from that point. Can be done if we agree. And in this case, I don't see the need for e-tags or timestamps, at least on the individual data bits. You have one for the full instance data set. I defined in my draft one Yang module. It doesn't really contain any configurable data, just these metadata annotations for the instance data, following the Yang metadata draft. These are the metadata I thought would be useful. We can have more or less. And what I see, this is needed because I know at least two implementations that are already using such instance data files. Not exactly these formats, but slightly different formats, but based on these principles. And it is needed for Yang push to document the capabilities, and we actually need it for Yang library and the alarm model as well, because we need to know what will be there in development time for NMS and others. Now, a few things that I don't want to do. So this is a big idea to document capabilities with instance data, and gives you the instance data format, but it doesn't state that which exact Yang modules you will have to use this for. I have this other draft that proposes to use it for notification capabilities. We'll have to have proposals for any other thing, any other Yang module. It doesn't state that, okay, you have this file. Does the toolkit have to load the file as is, or will it just generate it somehow? That's out of the scope. I state that this will be used in some way. And also the life cycle, whether, let's say I have an instance data set about Yang features. Can they change? Can they not? That is separate documentation. That's out of scope again for me. So I hope you love it. And in the long run, I would like to have this accepted in the work group.
Rob Wilson, Cisco. So I just had a couple of comments. I like this work. I think it's useful. First comments. In terms of your model definition, you've used metadata rather than, I wasn't sure why you're using metadata rather than just regular leaves here. That's something that wasn't clear to me. That
because this is actually metadata about the instance data set. So it's not real data that you will load anywhere. This, if you have a look at it, the metadata, instance data, the name of the instance data, the revision of instance data is really metadata about it. And also it gives you a nice encoding both for XML and JSON.
Yeah, I guess I would just put it in a metadata container and just have it as regular things, then embed the rest of the information lower down. Might be easier than needing. I'm not sure metadata helps you here as required. It makes it slightly more complicated, I think. The other comment I was just to say was you've defined XML and JSON formats. I think also, again, doing a binary encoding like CBOR or something, again, could be useful. I'm not sure so much as a standardization thing or an interoperational thing, but where you're storing this data on a device, I think it would be useful to be able to store instance data files in CBOR. So explaining how to do that, I think, has value.
There is no current the binary format. That's one point. I see no problem with defining later binary format. On the other hand, I think it is good if it's readable. So these would be more important for me.
Joe Clark, as part of the Yang catalog work, we built a model to first, yes, there's value in this. We built a model specifically to do this type of thing. We did it slightly differently in that we refer to the Yang library output, but we have kind of this metadata around it. So we think of things like the platform, the device version, so that you can say this platform with this version supports these modules. But it would just be additional metadata in your example, but we find that very useful for preloading into the catalog, so we can do some of the things Benoit said, where it said, given two libraries of modules, here are the differences, and here's what this platform supports and this vendor. And that's our use case. So there's, I think, some good crossover there.
I would add that Yang module tags is also one more use case where we could use this.
Thank you, Glenn. Yeah, I also think that this is useful. I had similar comments as Rob regarding your usage of annotations, and also the top level container here, instance data, it's not defined in the Yang module, right? So it's just defined in text elsewhere.
Yeah, in my draft.
If you were using something like Yang data extension, you could define it in the Yang module, and then you would get the CBOR and JSON and XML encoding kind of for free. Yeah. Instead of having the top level thing as a special entity.
Yeah, I'll look into it.
I don't, as a follow-up to Martin, another option is to define this instance data as a normal container and then use schema mount for inserting stuff. Or do you think this will be just some snippets that are not supposed to be validated by Yang, the contents of this? Because
it would be nice to validate them against the individual Yang modules by using schema mount.
Because otherwise you are including stuff that it's not expected to be inserted in such a container. But I think schema mount in fact can be.
Yeah, that you're right. That definition would be maybe more.
Create the data model for this. Other than that, I also think it's a useful work. I guess it could be used also in RFCs for describing some more complicated data models. It could be used by tools. My tool actually uses Yang library. I'm using a JSON format, so this encapsulating element is not needed in fact. But
it is still useful for carrying the metadata at least. But could we discuss the schema mount later offline?
Martin, I think using schema mount might be a bit overkill and might also be make it a bit less flexible, because then you would you would have to have top level stuff in here. And I think that this can be used with like snippets of data if you annotate the path.
And then you would need to describe somehow what's mounted inside.
Right. Well, yeah, it's more than linear. Yeah, so I'd rather make it linear.
It depends. Actually, I didn't mind. I didn't mean schema mount in the current form. I meant the schema mount, the future part of the schema mount that we are going to talk about tomorrow. So
Okay, let's discuss it offline.
So Kent, as a contributor, I agree with Martin. I think it's, one, useful work, but I also thought that Yang data might have been a better approach for approaching this, and maybe we could look into that. And then separately with my chair hat on, I apologize. We have run out of time. We only have 1 minute left in the session, so we won't be able to hear the presentations from Alex Klim and Igor, but let's continue those discussions on the list.
We have another session tomorrow. It's right now fully booked. If there's time at the end, we certainly can try this. If we have session time, we'll use it.
Yeah.
Right. That'd be fine.
How do we proceed?
So as to your presentation, I think you had some comments that should lead to at least another rev. So I think it would be good to integrate those comments and come back to the working group. I think there's interest in this problem. So it's not go away. It's adjust the document a little bit towards the directions
Is it
you've
too
heard.
early for adaptation? Or?
Yeah. And maybe after you adapt a little bit, it'll be worth polling.
Okay.
With that, we're actually exactly out of time.
Yes.
Thank you all
Thank you.
very much, and we'll see you tomorrow.
Do you see a possibility to asking this tomorrow? I don't think we need much time at all. Most of you have seen this. We don't even need to think. It's really just
I mean, if you're there,
I'll be there. I'll be there. I'll be there.
and so there may be a subset of those who are told that even interested in there may have
You have 90 minutes, right? So if we,
the whole room and you're there and comment, and there will then
I'm hoping that whatever can be discussed in 90 minutes can also be discussed in 85 when we have it.
Yeah, but honestly, I mean,
Sure.
Ideally, you would have presented immediately after. Well, no, I guess you would have. Yeah, so I'm thinking about the ECA draft. Immediately after you show. So then we could have had that back to back. But we're, doesn't expect you, if you were to present tomorrow, it's almost like too much time. It's like everyone would.
Sure. No, but I'm not. I thought we were talking about the NMBA compare.
Right, that's one of the
Right. Or don't you think is it? Or is it enough? Okay.
Much better.